this Ramadan.
Now, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe have recently published reports indicating a potential decline in grain harvest because of an intense El Nino induced dryness. These developments could put the entire Southern Africa maize supply chain at risk. That is according to Wandile Sihlobo, Senior Fellow at the Department of Agricultural Economics at Stellenbosch University. He joins us now to unpack this further. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon, Yaras. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so certainly some concerning reports coming out with a potential decline in grain, as we just mentioned, because of dryness. I think we could begin with some context in terms of what is going on here at the moment.
So, Yanis, we are now on what we call the 2023-24 summer crop season in Southern Africa and indeed in the world. And we knew when the season started in October last year that there was a possibility for dryness because we were moving away from 3 consecutive years of a La Nina rainfall, entering what we would call an El Nino. Now, generally, when it's an El Nino in Southern Africa, it's usually quite dry. While, for example, if you speak with someone in Argentina or in Brazil, it will be rainy that side, or someone in Kenya, it will be fairly rainy in that side of East Africa. But something interesting happened when the season started. We actually experienced a different El Nino, where we were receiving excellent rainfall across South Africa, across Zambia, Zimbabwe, the entire Southern Africa region, to an extent that farmers were eager to go to the fields, and they planted the typical area that they would plant for their summer crop, imagining that somehow the season will be fairly better and the El Nino will be more forgiving than what we had seen in the past. And for a moment around about January, we were thinking that the Southern Africa region will actually have solid supplies when it comes to grains and the agricultural products in general. The problem begins around about February, and February is an important month because it is where much of the grain and the oilseeds are flowering, entering what we call pollination. And when the crop is at that stage, you generally want more rainfall so that it can be able to mature well and give you a good yield. But we got the opposite. It started being very dry. Zambia started saying, look, we are losing half of our hectarage for maize. Zimbabwe started talking about millions of people that will be in hunger. And here at home in South Africa, we begin to see that the dryness is hitting the crop and had to revise our estimates, double digit from where we were. And now this is important because these 3 countries are also the anchors of Southern Africa maize production. South Africa alone producing about 26% of Southern Africa region and maize. So when there's a problem, there's a regional problem. That's the broad context of where we are with regards to this issue.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for putting that into perspective, because then that allows us now to understand what are some of the challenges that come as a result of this dryness. So when we're looking at the consequences, you do say that we've started on a rather dry note this year, this season, and that, of course, not looking too well in terms of production prospects for South Africa, yield prospects for South Africa. So what exactly are the concerns around this, and perhaps how can we best prepare to address them before they do eventually arise?
I mean, look, the broader concern is the fact that we may have a lower grain harvest in Southern Africa. And the effects of that are already clear. If you look at South Africa's grain prices on a JSE, on what we call the suffix prices, I mean, white maize, for example, is over 5,000 Rand per ton. It has increased over the past few weeks by almost 1,000 Rand per ton, which just shows you then those are concerns that are there about the supplies. And that's the issue across Southern Africa in general. In South Africa, we still think that because at the moment as we speak, we don't know how much the harvest will be, because there are patches that are dry and there are patches that have a bit of a decent crop. By the end of March, we will have a better sense of where South Africa's grain production may be. And of course, we are all praying for rain for the coming weeks that it will still help in certain areas. So that's the issue that we are dealing with, the moving target. In Zambia, we know that half of the maize production has already been damaged as of the end of February. And they haven't received any rainfall since then when the half of their maize crop was damaged, which means that there's been further damage happening. In Zimbabwe, it's the same story. The point then is that some of these countries may need to import more maize to actually fulfill their domestic needs. In South Africa, we still don't know for the medium term. I would say we still have a bit of a relatively healthier stocks to carry us through. But of course, we'll be watching what we get to harvest. So the consequence of all of this is that grain-related food products are likely to see a bit of an uptick on the prices if what we are seeing on white maize is to be the reality for much of the year. Of course, white maize prices are rising now, but for these to reach a consumer on a white maize product alone, it takes a bit of time of about 3 to 4 months as things get to be processed and go through the value chain. So those are some of the things that we would experience. But I think the broader implication on what you are asking is food insecurity in Southern Africa, which then begs the question to say, what should the governments and their businesses do in this context?
So when we're looking at the challenges that are now being faced as a result of this dryness, I know you mentioned maize is something of particular concern, but in terms of other crops, what else are we looking at?
I mean, the maize is a particular, and I'm highlighting it because it is a staple crop. But you're
Mm,
also facing challenges that are around soybeans. You're looking at challenges around sunflower, sorghum, so all really grains and oilseeds, and yellow maize, which is used to feed cattle. And so these are all of the challenges that are there. But I guess, Yanis, this takes us then to a question of saying, what should happen at the moment? And I think there are probably four policy propositions, if you are the governments in Africa, that you have to be thinking about. To my mind, the first one, because there's always an attempt when there are droughts to say, let's stop all exports. Let's try to put price cap when commodity prices are rising higher so that our consumers can be cushioned from dangers of inflation. But I think doing that would be a policy mistake because, as South Africans typically say, a cure for higher prices is higher prices. What you want is to allow the market to be flexible so that when the weather improves, the farmers can actually plant more area and then the supplies can recover. Because what that argument of capping prices or blocking exports also doesn't sympathize with is the reality that those that are farming, they are farming on an input costs that they have no control over, fertilizers, agrochemicals that South Africa imports and the region imports, so dependent on international prices. The other aspect that is important to consider is that the Southern African countries, then if they're not going to protect keep the prices, what should they be doing? The government should think of instruments at which they can utilize to support the indigent and look at the households and say, which are some of the households that are really under pressure and what policy instruments can we use to come up with some product supports in there. But that's possible only when you have the fiscal space to come up with grants and some form of supporting people if food prices become an issue as we anticipate. The third aspect is to say, can we engage with the likes of Mexico and the United States, who will be starting to plant in April, May, to plant more white maize that we can import? Because in the globally traded maize, 95% of it is yellow maize, and the problem in Africa is white maize. And the last point at which you can also engage is to say, can the likes of Zimbabwe and the others that are also fiscally constrained begin engaging with the organizations like the World Food Program to say, can they assist them in procuring the maize that will be needed so that the over 2 million Zimbabweans that will be in hunger, to a certain extent, they can receive some form of support on the starches and these staple products. Those are the broad policy points that I think we should be having a discussion about, of saying, how do we begin to move forward? Because
mm,
it does seem to me that we have a problem at hand as the Southern Africa region.
mm. So we do have a problem, okay? I guess then the crucial question is, are we ready and equipped and able to then put into place these policy recommendations that you've just raised?
I think on that, Yanis, I can speak for my home country, the Republic of Africa. I think with all of the conversations head with the minister, with the leadership in government, the DG, and ourselves as a chamber, we feel that South Africa may be in better position. Yes, there will be pain, but South Africa is in a better position to be able to have sufficient supplies over the foreseeable future. What I fear more about our neighbors in Africa, to say, will they have the fiscal space to bring this product? What can happen? I think of Zambia, where they are losing half of their maize crop. And there are many other small countries that have depended on Zambia on importing from there. And if then South Africa is also having supply constraints where we can feed ourselves mainly, because then once you cross that line of feeding ourselves and you are exporting, prices react to that and live for and be much expensive for some of our neighboring countries. So those are the dynamics. So the bottom point is that South African lawmakers are thinking and they are watching this and they are getting real-time information about what should happen. Likewise with the businesses like us at the Agricultural Business Chamber, we are looking into this. But the region, I'm not quite sure what is happening and the preparations that are being made. But I do think that the region should worry more than perhaps maybe the South Africans are worried.
Mm. And I think just finally, is there anything that ordinary South Africans can actually do to play their part? Are there any alternatives that we can look towards? I know you did mention maize is a staple diet in South Africa.
Yanis, I'm cognizant. I'm not saying to people, no, let's go and buy a lot of potatoes or rice, because then we end up driving rice prices higher, bringing undue pressures on that. But what I can tell you is that while in Southern Africa we have a white maize challenge, in the world there's a lot of grain. If you think about the numbers that are coming out of the of the International Grains Council, they show that on maize alone, production globally is expected to be up 6% with around about 1.6 billion tons of maize. Rice production is also solid, over 511 million tons that is there. Wheat production is solid, over 788 million tons that are there in the world. This is all to say global grain prices may come down. Wheaten products and rice and potatoes, maybe some of those, if white maize prices still increases in a significant manner. But those all something that to see over the coming months, because again, we are dealing with a moving target here. We don't know where our harvest will lead up to because we are experiencing this heat ongoing, and we are surveying about how much the damage on the crops will be.
Yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
That was, of course, Wandile Sihlobo from Stellenbosch University, speaking to us about the current risks that are posed to South Africa's agricultural industry, and that, of course, emanating from dry weather patterns that are currently affecting the country, as well as our neighbors up north in Zimbabwe and Zambia. And speaking about how this might actually play out locally on a South African scale, how this might affect food prices, maize being a staple crop. But yeah, of course, if you did miss part of that conversation, you can go back and find that on our YouTube as well as Facebook pages. Right now, we'll take a break. When we come back, we continue the conversation. Stay tuned.